Bo, are you in the room? Bo is not in the room. May I have a microphone? Did we start the stream? Good, excellent. Hello, live stream people. This is me getting a light crown. Jake, please come here. Ask me why I know.
So if you have a freeze dryer, think about getting a freeze dryer. There's a 10-pound limit on how much food you can put in the trays. The reason is that there's only so much moisture. And if you get over 10 pounds, what happens is there's so much moisture that gets sucked out, and then it refreezes on the inside of the cylinder. And then it freezes so much it bridges over to your trays and freezes to the trays. And then you can't get your damn trays out. Ask me how I know. You got to almost let it like defrost, and then you waste your food.
How many hours do you spend cleaning your freeze dryer after that?
I had to I was like picking, and I had like an pickaxe, ice axe, kind of 30 minutes to get to it.
All right. That's a good ask me how I know. I will turn this off. Okay, guys, it's time for the last session of today. And then we're going to flow into an evening of barter blanket. Who's never done barter blanket before? Keep your hands up if you brought something to trade. Okay. Put your hands back up. Okay, hands down if you brought something. Those who didn't bring something to trade, put your hands up, please. How many of you have something you think you could trade of a non-tangible manner? Labor. Bullshit. Massages, right? You got massages over here. What else do we have? Cash. Translations into which language? Spanish. Spanish translations. I'm just throwing that out as a foundation to think about. Even if you don't think you have something to barter at Barter Blanket, you do have something to barter at Barter Blanket. We'll talk more about that as we go into the evening. I'm pretty sure Barter Blanket's happening in here tonight because it's so cold. So we're going to do dinner. David has a surprise for us to keep us warm. So we'll talk about that too. And he might be convinced to make a small batch of it alcohol free for the yeah. So we've got an alcohol free and alcohol full thing. Nicole, what? Okay. But before then, we're going to talk about smart homesteading. Are you guys excited by that title? Yeah. What does it make you think of? What does it make you think of? Automation on the homestead. What else does it? What other smart organizational ideas have we heard of in our society? You're so loud. Smart grid. Does that make you happy? So is smart homesteading a good thing or a bad thing? What do you think? Yeah. Well, let's start with dumb homesteading. This is dumb homesteading. I got my homestead in 2007. And when I got it, I didn't know it was a homestead. You know what I thought it was? I thought it was a hillbilly fishing shack on a little over 3 acres. Actually, well, you'll see what it looked like in a minute. But I quickly realized that I did not want to stay in the city. I loved being in the country. You could grow things. You put seeds in the ground. You know what happens? It grows. It was so easy. I was like, man, I can produce all my food if I just move out here full time. And I do it. And so the first thing that I did that was dumb is I took a shotgun approach. All the things. I like to make the comparison of building in the car while driving it in 2007. What do I mean by that? Well, you know what most homesteaders have? Chickens, right? And you get these little puff balls in the mail, and then you steward them through adulthood, and some of them turn into meat, and some of them turn into eggs. So I ordered the puff balls. I had 5 weeks to build what I needed to build. Google wasn't very good in 2007 at telling me what to do. But there was a pretty good chicken forum, and I learned that I needed 1 square foot per chicken in my coop. Right? That's it. And I needed laying boxes. And I needed this thing called a brooder. And I needed to get them water. And I had to keep them at 98 degrees for the first week, and then I could drop it to 96 degrees the second week, and then 5 degrees the next week after that. And I went through all the research, and it took me about 5 weeks. Guess what happened in 5 weeks? Oh, shit. I did not have a brooder. Room in a workshop that could be made into a coop, but it didn't have a door. It snakes got in there. It was a mess. And so I took a heat lamp from Tractor Supply and I put it over a brooder, which I think I needed 1 or 2 inches per bird, according to them, to brood. And I crammed all these little teeny birds in the thing. There's not enough space. And I put the lamp on it. And amazing died. That's not bad. And for the next 6 weeks, I was not letting them go outside where it was too cold in May in Tennessee. And which is incorrect, by the way. And I kept making the brooder bigger, and it ended up being made out of cardboard, about that tall. And it was like strips of cardboard that kind of gently expanded out every couple days when I realized the chickens needed more space. It was a meat and egg run from, you know what I had? I had some sort of Red Cross. Growing up with meat birds, what could possibly go wrong with that? Does anybody know what goes wrong with that? There was the water rush. So when baby birds do this, they get to a certain age and they suddenly drink all the water on this one day. And you go out there and the water is empty and they're thirsty. And then you put water in and they all run to the water, and the ones who don't run fast enough get squished. That's actually how I killed one of my 2 birds. The other one just died out of the box. You know what else goes wrong when you mix meat birds with layers? Do meat birds poop more than layers? If you free feed your meat birds, what happens? You end up with these like, I can't move birds eating all day long. And by the time it was time to process the meat birds, I was 100% ready to process. I still didn't have a coop and run. And so I took doors and fences and windows and other things I could find, and I made this run. And then I had another 2 years until I was actually able to keep my chickens at night protected from raccoons, possums, snakes, and those sorts of things. That was the shotgun approach. Livestock before infrastructure. And do you know how I chose the location of my chicken coop? Nick knows. Nick, how did I choose the location of my chicken coop? It was there already. You know where it was? Well, this is the Holler homestead. Okay, this is what my homestead looks like. It has some steps, but it's super steep. And my house is kind of halfway up. And at the very bottom is a spring and a pond and a chicken coop. You know what that means you do every morning when you get up to let those chickens out? Down the hill. Crap, I forgot the eggs. Back down the hill, back up, right? So I had a very spread out. Do you know how I chose where my garden was? It was already there. Guess where it was? Chickens are here. House is here. And then there was an impenetrable mass of I don't know what's there. How many years do you suppose I did dumb homesteading? You'll find out soon. This is what my house looked like when I bought it. Pretty attractive, huh? It's built into the ground. What you can't see here, is this thing actually on? Yes. So these are cinder block walls sticking out. That's a glass door. These are random posts. And the rest of the furnace. And then there's ducting. No, that's the furnace. Ducting. Oh yeah, full screen. You're right. I didn't even. That would be great. You could probably see it better, right? I did it for everybody else, right? Okay, so it's not a high quality picture because it was in 2007. This is my HVAC unit. How many people here have their HVAC unit with all of it outside? Do you know what was going on here? Also, I have this great tower. I didn't know what was going on there either. I'll see some pictures along the way. We took all of that out. But what was going on there, the original guy who built it, this was a greenhouse. And he was using, it's south facing. He was using passive solar. Oh, I just want to point out one more thing here. That is the fire pit. You know how long that fire pit stayed there because it was there when I moved in? I took it out last year. I've had a lot of fun. There's a close-up. Now, if you saw that when you were looking for real estate, you'd want to buy that, right? I've got raised beds on the gutters. So you can see here in this one, it's the... So that was tame because there used to be horses there. And this is the original homesteading shack that was built in the 1800s. It's gone now. Just on the other side of that brush. Nick, do you remember what was on the other side of that brush when you got there first? Not yet. Not when you got there the first time. He doesn't. He couldn't. You know why he doesn't remember? He couldn't get there. He couldn't get there. Also, in the first years of Not Smart Homesteading, I got really interested in butchering animals. The reason there's this hand here is because I couldn't actually hold it by myself. So my buddy Brett, who showed me how to butcher, is holding it. That was all in my dumb homesteading years. Luckily, I needed an intervention and I got one. This was my timeline. 2007, I get the homestead. I do a lot of stupid shit. In 2013, I started listening to survival podcasts because I was interested in wild edible plants. I learned how to can. I learned how to 2013. I learned how to butcher. I learned how to raise chickens. I learned how to keep chickens alive. I learned why you don't keep 6 chickens alive because they're just going to pass on bad genetics. I learned a lot of things. And I made a lot of changes to the house. And then I listened to this redneck hippie duck farmer, and he brought up this really cool world. And the whole time, I was working on developing smart homesteading or modern homesteading. Here was this unique idea I had. This before I heard Jack. I thought you could design a homestead in a way made another system. So I was trying from 2007 to 2013 to invent a design science that was already invented called permaculture. And if he hadn't done 7 wild edible plants to keep in your backyard, I would still be trying to invent that stupid thing because I was canning tomatoes, right? So what then would you think are elements of smart homesteading? It's founded, so proper zones. That's good. Capture resources. I had already determined that there was no way I could ever move an elderberry once it planted itself somewhere and just had elderberry patches by the time Nick got there. which you can see when he gets there in well, you actually got there in 2016 for the first time, or 17, somewhere around there. This is what I kind of boiled it down to. You start with your long-term goals. If you had asked me in 2007 what my long-term goals were for the homestead, I would have said, home what? That's your land for the first time. You think you want a homestead. You think you want sheep. You think you want cows. You think you want ducks. You've heard about aquaponics. You have this vast array of ideas. And it's a really good idea to take a chill pill, even if there are resource shortages coming. Because if you do all of those in your first year, you're going to have something happen like my 140 tomato experience. My first year on the homestead, I went up to that garden, which had been a chicken yard. I just didn't realize it till I sleuthed. Tomato plants, and the picture of me on Twitter holding tomatoes like this is from 2007. That's why I look young in that picture. And I had the best tomato year ever, and I learned how to can them. And I was like, this is easy. So I planted 140 tomato plants in what is now called the pig pasture. Guess how well that second year went? I got less tomatoes off 140 plants than I got off 20 plants in the first year. And for the first time on my property, I had this wonderful new disease called tomato blight, late season tomato blight, which has never left from that time. Okay. Disability. So it took me years to figure out long-term goals. Design for old age and flexibility. And to the extent that you can, there is no reason not to do this. Integrate automation. A lot of people think we need to be poor homesteaders who don't have enough money to afford the means to automate things. Automation doesn't have to cost a lot, but if you have more money, it does make it easier. And that we are somehow cheating if we don't do it the way it was done 250 years ago manually. Is that smart? I don't think that's smart at all. Things have changed since this time. So the first step to figuring out my big picture, oh, this doesn't work as a clicker, is to assess your assets. I think the best asset I have on the farm is in this picture. Do you know what that is? That is a spring-fed pond. What animal do you see in that pond? Turtles. No, there are no more turtles because there's a redneck with a gun. We have snapping turtles this year. Those are ducks. Snapping turtles will snap a duck's neck off, by the way. Most important asset, and the one I most underappreciated all the way up until Nick Ferguson came here, was like, you have a spring-fed pond. Was that pond. I thought it was a pain in the neck. I thought it was a muddy mess. I thought I didn't want ducks because you know what ducks are going to do? They're going to poop everywhere, right? And that because it's spring-fed, I can actually stock it with more than 2 ducks and still have it do well. The only problem is they will eat all the duckweed. And that spring is on my property. For water. Water's very important. Now, just because you don't have a spring on a piece of land doesn't mean it's not necessarily the right land to buy, right? There are other ways to get water. Some of it falls from the sky from time to time. Some people can dig a well. But if you have this beautiful, tasty spring flowing up at the bottom of the hill, do you think that might be a good place to start? Yeah. So you assess your assets. That was my biggest asset. I think my second best asset was the house was positioned, which in the hot heat of summer is uncomfortable. But the problem is the solution, right? It's also a great place to grow tomatoes right up in front of my house, and they block the house from the sun. I wouldn't have thought of that in 2007. I wouldn't have thought of, hey, how can I use this to do that? A south-facing roof is really good for what? Goats. Absolutely. Solar. Solar goats. I have the best solar goats. Is an easier install than solar panels and a battery bank? Solar water heater. So after being exposed to this concept of permaculture and realizing I had some big goals, when we decided to set goals for the holler, I knew I wanted it to be an event center because what is my secret sauce? Training. I'm a pretty good teacher, right? And I thought it was important to empower people to take control of their lives. And a really great way to take control of your life, by the way, is to be able to produce from your land. So, training center, and the property was like this. And the house was 1,200 square feet. Where am I going to put people? Well, I figured it out. I also wanted to get food production off the property as much as possible. And I had come up with this notion. My property was really good at growing hot peppers south and meat, oddly enough. I was good at getting chickens off of there. I was completely resistant to sheep from day one when it was brought up by somebody in this room. So do I regret that decision? I have a wonderful pet goat, though. I like her a lot. Oh, the goat. That goat is still alive. So I assessed the assets, I set the goals, and I knew I wanted a simpler lifestyle. I wanted to peel my house off dependency on the grid, but I thought it was a stupid idea to have a goal of off grid for a house that's tied into and wired for electricity already. Why would I undo that? Waste the HVAC unit. I decided to heat with wood instead of power because I had to invest money into a heating system anyway. And that was a more renewable resource that I could manage. But what if I get the flu? So I added electrical heating capability to the house inside so that if I'm sick or older, I can do that. Okay. Well, let's go back to the roadmap. Nick came in 20. It's your fault. It's all your fault. And for years after that, I had goats on tethers eating brush. And the next time he came to my house, he was like, whoa, this is very different. Very different. And I had set a bunch of foundations with other things, like an event space and a patio. And what else? There was a camping area for hip camp. Probably was the biggest difference when you drove up that second time. You could see the land. Yeah. That was just from one little change. Yeah. So then you'll see that it's kind of red and then it's black after 2022. In 2013, I knew I needed to do smart homesteading. From 2013 to 2016, I was trying on my own and I brought in an expert. From 2016 to 2022, I was still not doing smart homesteading, but here's what changed. I thought about from a frugality of time perspective. It doesn't mean I implemented, but everything from how I fed the animals to which project I was working on next, I would think about it differently. And so I went from running all over the property all the time to feed all the animals and moving feed from down the hill to up the hill to staging food by the animals and having a path I follow every day. How long do you think it takes me to feed my animals? 15 minutes. You listen to my podcast. He's like, yeah, 15 minutes. But for that, occasionally I'll once in a while, not even once a week, because we have figured out how to stage the food in such a way to do that. How much time do you think I spend moving animal excrement? Very little. There is twice a year where the duck coop gets scooped out, because I do a deep litter method in the duck coop, which is still where? Still there, because it was not a priority for me to change. Because why? What's my big picture goal? Event center. Second goal, mobility friendly. I think if we design our homesteads to have easier access, it does two things. It's easier on us long term, short term. It's easier when we get helpers. And in the event that, it's shocking to hear this might happen, when we get older, we get less mobility sometimes, right? I've heard tell, right?
Ask me how I know.
Ask me how I know. Yeah, John's like, ask me how I know. We would have access. But it wasn't really until 22 that the scales tipped. And this is what happened. I had to go through all that red. A good story has what? Is mostly what? All the pain I got out of this time. I can take care of a tomato. I can can a tomato. I can cook with tomatoes and make it taste good without adding sugar. I can just about anything. I can make cheese. I can ferment food. I know how to store things in a root cellar so that they will last from October into April. I know how to tile a bathroom. I know how to stretch fence. Boy, that was a hard one skill. I know how to change a breaker. My closet concept from Jack Spirko. If you don't have to hire a guy and you can just do a thing, you just didn't have to earn the money to pay the guy. And I had a breaker go out in my pump house. Here's the biggest thing I've learned. And if who's brand new to homesteading or wants to homestead, raise your hand. Are any of you not on your homestead yet? Wondering what to learn about? How good are your plumbing and wiring skills? Okay. If you get an independent water source, you're going to need to make your water source work. And when it breaks, sometimes it takes the guy 2 days to get there when he said he'd be there the next day. Make water work, and it often requires electricity to make water work, which means the person you have to hire to fix it has to have 2 skills, not 1 skill. You're stuck with no water, or you're stuck carrying buckets. Now, I'm okay with going back to the ancient ways and carrying buckets if I have to. My first year in the holler, I was carrying hot water to the tub and dumping it in because I couldn't get the water to work. But I learned how to do water. And I would say out of all the skills I just mentioned, that was the most hard one and painful, and I'm still learning about it thing. But it's totally worth it to now and not invest money in the property. Invest time in learning skills, and one good skill to how to maintain a pump house, how to run wiring, how to change out a plug, how to change out a breaker. Breakers are scary mentally, but they're not actually that scary. But my first one I literally was like, I'm at a panel that has a main shutoff. Okay, so there's no power to it. I have the tester. There's no power to it. I hand Mark a 2x4 and I'm like, if I go, just whack me with that so I don't touch it anymore if I get stuck to it. Like I had all of these horror stories in my for. And I just went click, done. It was so easy. It was really funny. So what I got for all of that was the ability to have a smart homestead. And we kind of put the icing on the cake this year. So this is the Holler Homestead. Right now, aerial view. Thank you, Steve. This is my house. That's the prepper pantry right there. You know what that is? That's a solar water heater. It's seasonally on. That saves me $250 a year in propane. I measured it. Now that we've had inflation hit propane prices, but the first year I measured it, well, look at all this. What is all that about? Okay, so my house was built into the side of a hill improperly. Which way does water flow? When my house was built, you want to know where downhill was? Approximately this corner right here. And I didn't know it, but for about a decade, water was going. I knew my house had a humidity problem. Water was coming. This was built up against the house. So this little ditchy thing didn't exist. Water was seeping under the house, settling here in that corner. I could not knock humidity back. And I was about to invest about $8,000 in a dehumidifier. And I got online and read about dehumidifiers. And it said the best thing to do is to fix the core problem. And I was like, oh, maybe I could like pay a guy to dig a hole and look. And sure enough, what was happening? So this is downhill this way, okay? This is also downhill this way. So water comes here and I want it to either go around this side, which there is a French drain here I put in, or I want it to go out this way, right? Well, when the house was built, they dug down and there's on. It tilts here and it gets to about there where that jogs back. And it bumped up 12 inches. So guess why the water was going down here? That rock right there. Every time we get bored, we chisel a little bit more at that rock. It's kind of fun. My first event, Jack Spirko spoke at it. Helped me put LFTN Spring Workshop on the map by coming. So thank you for that. And they built an aquaponics system here, which is zone 1. This did not exist. What did we do instead, Jack? Do you remember? It's outside. So I had no infrastructure. I had porta potties and a tent. And we crammed everybody into this tiny tent. And they were all very gracious. Who was at that first one besides Jack? You were, David was. Anybody else here? Okay, you guys missed the first one. We had a good time though. It was great. We cooked up here and we went all the way downhill to approximately here to the tent with the food, carrying it manually with our hands. And then we carried it all back up the hill. But the one thing I had done well is I had come here first and realized you can ask people to wash one. So that the next year, I wanted the tent here. The tent and we poured a slab down. There's a building here you can't see in this picture. And I wanted a tent over that slab, and the tent company came. And you know what they said? No. They said no. Why did they say no?
Can't get a truck up there.
No, that wasn't the problem. They didn't want to drive stakes there. And so I ended up with this tent, like topography. It's flat here, and then it starts going downhill because I have little steps on this hump. So it was like all the tables were doing this. So I bought my own damn tents and I put them where I wanted them. Stakes be damned. And we did several events right here with 2 tents. Now, how many of you were at the events when it was at the tent phase? Ed, you weren't there at the tent phase? Okay. And then I built this carport because you know why? Because when you have a bad online ticket system and you accidentally oversell, you realize you need to put these people somewhere. And I did that. So I built that. And this year we added Taj Mahal as part of digging this out. Taj Mahal, all open air. How fun was that event space upgrade for the people who had your hands up compared to others? Woo, why? Stays much drier. How was the outdoor shower upgrade? Nice. Yeah. Once this had all happened and realized we're back to the roadmap, right? 2016, I started thinking about it. 2017, I had my first actual workshop. 2018, 2019, 2020. Oh, 2020, sorry. 2021, I started adding a little infrastructure every. And then 2022, I finally got all the infrastructure in. Had I put in a food forest yet? No. Had I added my final livestock plan, which is never final, but no. Had I moved the garden? Sort of. I I was growing hollow roast, which is roasted there. I was growing most of my food in that aquaponic system. I was actually growing less food in 2021 than I was growing in 2013 when I realized I had a problem because I knew I was growing it dumb in 2013 and I wanted to grow it smart. So I was doing all this zone 1 stuff. I was tomato, and the reason was I wanted to put my resources into what? The primary directive. What was the primary directive? Events. I also wanted to grow food. Very important to me. Now, why do I tell you all that? Are you going to put an event center in on your homestead? No, but if you know your primary objective for your homestead, whether that be meat security, whether that be I want it to be a beautiful place that also produces some food, and you take care of priority 1 first, everything else flowed. So I had all of that time. Taj Mahal goes in, and all of a sudden, Nick's like, okay, the food forest goes here, here, and here, and this is how you do it. And it's because it's this time of year in Tennessee. That's a microswale. And there's a microswale here. There are trees planted here in a straight line. And there are trees here too. It's hard to see them, right? Food forest went in very quickly once I had my primary objective. Had I tried to put my food forest in 2016, guess where I would have put it? Back behind this cabin here somewhere. It would have gone back that direction. No. Do I go here? Yeah. Now, why, pray tell, do I not have a densely planted food forest? In fact, you want to see a tour of it in video? I have a video. You want to see it? Okay. Yes, you do. Roll it. Courtesy of Steve. This is it here, I believe. This is it. There's no sound. That's just a drone driving through. That's the outhouse for events. We do composting outhouses because we don't have black widow problems. That's Taj Mahal. Oh, yeah, sorry. You want me to do it again? Yeah. Okay. We'll go back again. Do it again. Okay. So this is starting towards the bottom of the hill, pig pasture to the left. We'll talk about that pig pasture in a second. That's my wonderful chicken tractor that totally works but is not beautiful. Humanure. Outhouse. There's a grave right there. You can see this is one of the micro swales. And hill aquaponics install that's in process. That's where the goats are. That's, there you go. You can kind of see it better. You can see the tree sticks. That's my cherry tree that's not there yet. You see how wide those spaces are? It's nothing like the food forest you did. Look, there's people. Pig pasture. That's it. That's probably, I don't know, was that 1.5 acres, 2 acres for that space? 1 acre? Yeah. Yeah. Why would he design his? What do you graze through yours? Ducks. What am I grazing through mine? Sheep. Sheep need more space. So I'm also growing a different crop there, which grows really well in Tennessee every year except for 2022. And that's grass and other things that sheep can eat, right? So we purposely designed it a little straighter, a little less, it's kind of on contour, but we made it straighter so it's easier to run fencing through there. That's why the micro swales don't do all that stuff. And with enough space that I can graze them off that I don't want them eating. And then guess what I'm not doing? Because this was very important to me. This is related to designing as I get older. Mowing. Guess who mows my lawn? They're mowing it a little too well right now. That's just because we're not growing grass right now so well. So when I say smart homesteading, I'm not meaning all the gadgets everywhere. What I'm meaning is the same thing that we talked about earlier today. What's that? Systems thinking, right? It all comes back to the same thing, Jack. See if this will go back in where it was. Full screen. So here's some I wanted to show you some of the improvements. So you saw those old pictures. And I want to leave time for actual homesteader questions from y'all. So that's the aquaponics system that Jack and David built. Doesn't that look great? I particularly appreciate the woodwork right here, David. Yeah. This is the hillside garden. So the purpose of this was to push the hill back to keep the water from going under my house. But I had a second requirement. It was not a cinder block wall. Every one of those rocks came from my property. Guess how much that cost me? Two hospital visits for a crushed finger, same finger twice, not mine. And 3 days of an excavator at $600 a day. And a friend who must like me a whole bunch because he spent 3 days pointing to rocks and saying, stack that one there. Stack that one there. I have a friend who has a freakish brain. Most of my friends have freakish brains, come to think of it. He can help out any software. Okay. The $600 a day is cheap. Yeah, that's with the equipment and no gas fee. Yeah, and it has a thumb. Yeah, he's a great operator. This is Taj Mahaler from down low, so that's where the events are held. And guess who else joined us this year? I ate the one on the right. Okay, let's talk about pigs. I originally did not want sheep. I wanted to rotate pigs on my property. That's Lady Pig, and that's LB. LB's shoulders come to here. From Idaho pasture pig. He's half IPP, half rock. They're really sweet pigs, aren't they, Steve? So I put him in the pig pasture, and guess what? I did not have in place infrastructure for the pigs, and I ended up. Do you know what I ended up with? A big mud pasture. So I decided to rotate them on my property, and we ran the electric fence. They were on my property for 1 day. And I said, tactical, put them back in that pasture. They ripped it up so badly from rooting around. I realized that instead, I would end up with one giant mud pit. And that they needed to rotate through much more acreage than I had. And so I left them on that pasture until we could move them somewhere else. They are actually for sale right now as a breeding pair. But I did get some delicious offspring from them. And I decided if I put pigs on my property, guess what I need to do? No, little pigs. Yeah. And I don't really like raising pigs, to be honest. I like the sheep. The sheep eat the grass. The pigs tear stuff up, even the little ones. That's the neighbor's pasture with. And that, my friends, is part of my air conditioning system. That goes back to systems thinking, right? We're blocking the sun with the tomatoes. Before we put the food forest in, the other big change we made was to pump the water from the bottom of the hill to this very expensive storage tank that used to have, you know what was in that? Smoky, what was it? What's moonshine cherries for a Smoky Mountain Distillery. I didn't wash it that good, Jack. So the water pumps to this small storage tank. Why? It's above. Water goes out. What do I have? Gravity-fed water with not enough pressure to take a shower, but I can wash my hands and flush the toilet. Those pipes go right through the food forest. So while we had the equipment out, I was like, well, let's put pipes in the ground. But I know the big picture is to slowly peel off the grid and to make my life easier. And I like air conditioning. And I have 55-degree water coming up at the bottom of that hill. Do you know what 55-degree water does when run through like coils with a fan? Geothermal. You can do two kinds of systems. Closed are where they circulate. Open, you just take the water. So I put lots of pipes in the ground in addition to these pipes, because while it was open, it was better to spend like $600 on pipe and lay it and be ready to put in a geothermal system than to dig through the middle of my food forest, which it was a big investment of time and planning, right? It's not going to forward. Yeah, there we go. That's the water heater. So, smart homesteading, long-term goals, design for old age and flexibility. Even if you're 20, it's your forever homestead, design for that. If it's not, design for that, because somebody's going to live there. And if you buy another homestead, whatever. So that's sort of the story. I wanted to leave time for questions, because when I asked you on the chat what you wanted to know about, I got questions like, how do you choose land? So who has a question that's not a joke? we need a mic. Yeah. Okay. What do you want to ask? What? Oh, there's a grave on my property.
The question is,
Why
why
is-
did you just glaze past the grave,
Michelle.
Michelle?
Everybody
That's-
calls me Michelle.
I
It's
don't
weird.
know. Sarah.
And if there are questions on there,
Nicole, why did you just not explain the grave better?
because it flew over it really fast. That grave is not a human grave. But one of the things that changed for me on the homestead, I am a cat whisperer. I'm really good with cats. I have loved cats and hated dogs for most of my life. Would you have known that about me, Jack?
I would not have known that. You have so many wonderful dogs.
So I had chickens, and you know what happens to chickens when hawks come? You don't have chickens. Really want to land on your property? Woof, 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 woof. A barky, loud, scary-looking thing. And so I thought, okay, I'll give a dog a try. And I found this wonderful dog, half lab, half shepherd. And when I went and saw her, I fell in love with her. And it wasn't how she looked. It was how she behaved. She responded to what I wanted immediately at 12 weeks. And so I brought this poor little thing home, and she was terrified. And the first thing she did was eat a chicken. And then I taught her not to eat chickens. And we went through training together. I took a training class with her because I felt I was the one who needed to be trained. I think Dorothy can understand, like, German Shepherds just like take your heart. I'm a German Shepherd person too. That's why I like your new dog is very cool, even though she's not a German Shepherd. Same sort of reasons. So Sage died last year, and I buried her there. And she's actually in the food forest. She will eventually, she's currently growing some flower bulbs. I added the crocus. Yeah, the saffron crocus. And I have some sage plants I've started that will go on her grave. I had already put sage plants there last year and that. So I have some backups. So she'll kind of be a little herb garden, flower garden thing. And unfortunately, that was in before the design of the food forest. And I'm like, well, A, don't dig there because it hasn't been long enough. And B, it's staying there. So yeah, that's why there's a grave there. But interesting fun fact about the holler. The cabin next door was built in 1830, and there are two graves from about 1860 that are unmarked. And in fact, a whole graveyard there where most of the headstones have been destroyed. But people will come up and visit the graves. We found out who was in the, and then somebody found a description of where their great-grandmother was buried, and it was listed in the wrong county, but the road names and all the landmarks were the same. And the name of the graveyard was the Starnes graveyard, and the Starneses owned that property. I'm like, oh, I know exactly where that is, and they were super stoked to find that. So we also do have actual graves with people in them, because we put people in the ground when they die. That's what we do. Yes.
I think I heard you say something about goats tethered to help clear the property.
Mm-hmm.
My neighbor's got a couple of goats that are in milk. They've destroyed her property, and now she's ready to get rid of them. So I've got the first rights of refusal before I bring them on to absolutely avoid and things to try.
How good are your fencing skills?
They can be improved upon, but
So there's this meme, and it has one strip of wire, and it says cattle. And then it has a wood fence and it says horses. And then it has a prison with a watchtower and, razor wire and it says goats. That said, you can train goats to keep them in a fence. The thing is they can jump higher than you think and they are motivated to try all day long. I've learned from Nick how to train them on electrical wiring, but because I was so crappy at fencing and if stretch it enough, it gets wavy and that becomes a launching point for a goat to go over the fence, right? So the first couple of years trained them to tether, but when you tether a goat, you have to really keep an eye on it because they can choke themselves. The reason I didn't use electro netting, 2 reasons. Everybody has a story about the goat who got its head through the electro netting and got shocked to death, and I couldn't stomach that. And then my property is all like that. It's terrible for electro netting. It's great for single strand. And I think Nick wants to say something about goat fencing, or no? Is that why you're standing there? Yeah, go for it.
So goats get 4 rank fence.
12 joules minimum.
High tensile or aluminum, something. But you need several strands, and you need a fence charger that when you touch it, because you need to touch it and just experience it. You need to have one
Or you can
that
just come to
is
Jack's.
putting enough juice out that if you unplug it and you're holding the plug in your hand and there's no possible way electricity, you're still terrified to touch that wire. That's how strong it needs to be. If you're not terrified, it ain't strong enough.
I will also say this, having done meat sheep since June and watched them clear land, not quite. They clear the underbrush almost as well. And they are much easier to keep fenced, although we have had our moments.
So I would just say if somebody wanted to give me 2 goats, they'd be hanging from a gambrel the day I got them.
That said, I could see loving raising goats with the right infrastructure. My property is not the right place for a herd of goats.
Hi, Nicole. I'm interested in a solar hot water heater. So
Yeah.
Would you back up a little bit and maybe go over some of the details of it, pros and cons?
So the solar water heater is here. And what we have, this was a homemade one. You can buy them. But I was saving money and it's on a tilt so water drains out if it rains. That's a roofing panel. And there's insulation under, like the foam board insulation. Here are 200-foot coils of, I think it's half-inch. Yeah, it's half-inch copper painted black. Okay. So the water comes out of here slowly. I have a pump that can rotate hot water. It's a special kind of pump. I'm going to replace it for one that runs off a solar panel ultimately because I only need it running during the day. Water goes in, rotates through there, comes out here. That's if it gets too hot, it goes psh. And there are 2 valves I can open to drain it in the winter so there's no water and I can hook up a compressor and blow it out. Okay, so that's the system. Once what it's doing is there's the old hot water here, or the old water heaters under that vent because it was propane, it was a tank. It rotates through that tank, comes out the bottom of the tank, goes back in the top of the tank. When I turn the hot water on in the house, water comes from the tank to another heater that's a tankless water heater inside that little building that if the water is not 120 degrees, brings it up to 120 degrees. Why? Because I like hot water anytime I want hot water. Right? Not just at noon. Yes. The sun's I actually used this exclusively for 2 weeks when we had to disconnect my propane. And from about in the summer, July, 10 to about 5, the water was hot enough to take a shower. It was fine, right? But in the evening, it would cool off again. And I do have that pump on a timer, so from sun up to sundown it goes, and then I don't rotate it through the cold air at night. So that's the water. The important components of that are that you need to get the right kind of pressure release valve that's temperature triggered, because that is something that you do safety issue. And then I think it's important to top the water off because underheated water can breed some bacteria you don't really want to have. The one thing I am replacing is this PEX has been hit by the sun. And so when we redo this roof, which is getting redone, that's going to probably be either copper or PEX inside a wooden where the sun isn't hitting it, because it can start releasing toxins.
I just bought some raw land. I'm trying to build a house and a homestead. What's the best advice or any advice you could give me to have like workshops to help build a home or build out a food farm? Doing and Jack.
I've been doing my podcast since 2016. I've been building communities since 2012 or 13 in the homesteading areas. So this is the same advice I'd give somebody raising money for a nonprofit. Dig the well before you're thirsty. The community comes first before it's easy to do the kinds of workshops. I think rather than that, step back and invest some time and money in finding the best places to start rather than worry about having people help you build things. Because while it's really cool that I had a food forest install event like 2 weeks ago to do work at my place. That's pretty cool, huh? It cost me the exact same amount of money, because it cost me more money than to do than I got from tuition and after the feeding expenses were done, as it would have cost me to hire Nick to come up for one day and just have the 5 of us put it in. For me, because what's my primary objective? Event center, establishing reputation, equipping 20 people who can now go do these things, learning the breadth and depth of how to trim the roots of a tree that you get from Lowe's that's all messed up. All of that's priceless. And I have video of it, so it's going to turn into a video course, right? Things were great. Plus, it was my 50th birthday party, so we had a great time. We had oysters on the half shell. We had really good food. But I would have gotten done faster, probably with Nick doing more work than me. So with less work, I would probably dug fewer holes in the crappiest part of my yard. But that's okay. But it cost about the same. So I think the other thing about doing workshops is really carefully assess what the cost is and make sure, if your goal is make money or get things done for free with help, it's great to permablitz people's properties, and it can really give you a bump. That's what the Tennessee G relationships first. And it can take a lot longer when you're teaching than when you're just doing. So just think about that balance. I also think an outside consultant is worth every penny. Somebody like Nick Ferguson or Carrie Brown's really good. There's like lots of people who are good. I've had 5 permaculturists on my property look at it, and somebody says like, "Oh, how did that go? I bet they fought." No. They looked at the property, understood my goals, and they all complimented each other and added to each other's advice. It's been great. But me doing that by myself, it's really helpful I'm too emotionally tapped. Garden. And then I was like, oh yeah, that's obviously the right. In fact, David was helping me design that last year here. Yeah.
So I'd say one of the things you need to keep in mind if you're going to do things like this is you're doing it as a labor of love. You can make some money at it, but you don't make as much money as you think. It costs a lot to do one of these. And Nicole mentioned a nonprofit, and made me think of a quote that I heard Mark Shepard say one time at an event about nonprofits. And he said, a nonprofit without a profitable entity attached to it is a professional begging organization. And I did my first workshop in 2013 here. I started the podcast in 2008, and I had about 50,000 listeners before I did a workshop. And I'll also say, don't try to force it in a place that won't work. I would have never done one of these if we had stayed in Arkansas. That property was not suited for doing something like this, and it would have been unfair to my neighbors. They would have not. I don't think they would have approved of this going on there. So one of the things we had decided we want to do it. We did not just assess this property from a standpoint of a place to live. We assessed it from a standpoint of doing workshops.
Mm-hmm.
And the hell that the rock is. Anyway.
Hey, Nicole, this question is regarding livestock, your sheep. Kind of 3 points I'm asking about. What do you like about the sheep? How labor intensive are they? And then like, what's your goal for your yield out of it? Is this strictly meat, or is it kind of, that's my question.
My goal I'm going to go backwards. My goal for the yield from the sheep, because that's where I started, was first to keep the grass trimmed. Second, to make meat for us to eat. Third, to make meat I can sell to help bring money back into the homestead. Because for me, I want to get back on it for reason number one, it would still be cheaper than paying a mowing guy. Okay. Yeah, fertility is also important. That grows the grass that feeds the sheep. I only do meat sheep. They are hair sheep. And the last thing that the benefit I got from it was that I have a sustainable meat source off my property. How hard are they? If you listen to the last 4 months of Friday episodes, you will hear how hard they were. And that's probably the best answer. I will say we've made them harder than they need to be, but we also were using them to clear land, which means we had to clear every time we move fencing, we had to clear brush partner in the business, right? So that was brutal. And then it didn't rain this year. You know what grass likes to grow? Rain. So we've had grounding problems with our fence because the ground's so dry, and we have had trouble growing the grass. And we're lucky the neighbor said we can use his 16 acres, and the next neighbor down has said we can use his 20 acres. So if I could have done that number of sheep on my 3 acres in a typical Tennessee year, I would have had to slaughter a lot sooner than I slaughtered had I not had that, or bought a lot of hay. Yeah. And I'm happy to talk more about the other stuff offline. Yeah.
I just heard you're only running meat sheep, not wool sheep.
Yes. Because they are less prone to parasites, and I don't want to deal with shearing.
Yeah,
I have
what
breeds.
I was wondering about the parasite loads.
Yeah, so I have breeds that are parasite light, and I do not have them vaccinated. I rotate them every 3 days, and they don't hit the same pasture within 60 days.
Usually on 3 acres.
I'm doing it on 18 acres. Right now I have 6. I had 11. 5 are now in the freezer.
I was wondering about is that the fiber. Are you growing like any hemp or anything like that? Any kind of linens, crop, flax?
No.
You don't plan on? Okay.
I mean, maybe someday, but that's not immediate need for me. Yeah. But I can see value in it. See, you need to set up your homestead to do that because I bet you're interested in it. Yeah.
So Nicole, I know you live in the cement block place. If you had the option for the same exact setup, same location, but it was a stick built property, would you have gone with a stick built or stuck with the cement block?
I hate my house. I love where I live. I have hated my house from the day I moved in. The good thing about it is it's a thermal mass that when I heat it, radiates heat for a while, and when I cool it, radiates cool for a while. Okay. But if I had had a stick-built place that I could make efficient and put a wood stove in and had light, I would totally have bought it faster. And in fact, I talked to somebody here about giving me a permaculture-based architectural plan for changing the Holler homestead. That's my next thing. We've got the food forest in. My next big push is more light without losing, and a little bit more space without losing the efficiency for heating and cooling and these other things. But yeah. Now you know I hate my house. Yeah, what's the question online? How many sheep on a small 1 to 2 acres of land? Hey, it's my favorite answer. It depends. It depends on what the quality of your pasture, how well the grass grows. And anytime you go online and find a ratio, it'll say something like 2 to 4. You don't know until you get sheep there. And I would start with fewer, and I would have a fencing plan in advance. And I would actually have somebody who knows about sheep come out and help you assess the quality of what you're growing. Do you have clovers and other things mixed in there? How is it seasonally? Because what's going to happen if you live in a place that has winter is the grass stops growing. Right? What do you do then? Well, then you bring in hay. That's your only, or you feed them grain. So it's an it depends sort of thing. I think we're out of time. Is there one last question? Or are we good? Ideas for smart, frugal fence solutions. Ground is a rock during summer. You're screwed. So what I would do is get the fencing in and have a plan, what I call, the back vibrating. I would have permanent temporary fence solutions, so to speak. So I would get posts in the ground when you can get them in the ground. If your ground is a rock in the summer, and then if you're rotating animals, you can move to have the posts there, but you can move the fence. I would say this on fencing though, to the degree that you can keep it from being frugal. If you mean frugal with your time, then put in woven wire. Because that fence is badass and it lasts a really long time, but it costs money, right? To the extent that you can invest and make efficient, I think that's really important. My goats have different fencing than my sheep, which use different fencing than the poultry we rotate, which use different fencing than the pigs. And a lot of it is electric. I will say this, I love electric fencing because once an animal understands what it is, they mostly stay in, except for goats. But they mostly stay in. Yeah, he has concrete blocks with the step-in posts, but if what you're trying to fence in is going to push through things, right? It doesn't matter. So fencing really depends on the kind of animal and the application, and your problem is you're trying to use movable fencing and you can't step in the posts because the ground is rock hard, then you're going to need to get them in, or you're going to need to have big heavy posts that you move. I'd rather just put them in when I can get them in the ground at that point and have more posts. Posts are not, they're like $3 to $6 a piece for step-in posts. Do you have anything to add to the fencing thing?
The cheapest, best option is high tensile electric.
High tensile electric
Timeless T-posts.
with timeless T-posts. Okay, high tensile electric with timeless T-posts just came from Pocket Nick. All right, guys. Thank you so much for listening to the homesteading story. David, do you want to say what the hot beverages we're about to